The morning sun streamed through the airport windows as Dr. Maya Johnson wheeled her carry-on luggage toward gate B-17. She checked her watch, still 30 minutes before boarding, just enough time to answer a few urgent emails before her flight to Chicago. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Kids are fine. Tyler finished his science project. Zoe says good luck on your speech." A smile crossed Maya's tired face. She'd been up since 4 a.m. finishing her presentation slides after a grueling 12-hour shift at Memorial Hospital. As head of neurosurgery, she rarely got enough sleep, but this conference was too important to miss. The American Medical Association had asked her to deliver the keynote address on breakthrough treatments for pediatric brain tumors, research that could change thousands of lives. Maya found a quiet spot near the gate and opened her laptop. As she worked, her mind drifted to her children. Tyler was turning 11 next week. They'd have to celebrate when she got back. And Zoe had a dance recital this weekend that Maya had rearranged her entire schedule to attend. Being a single mom, while running a department wasn't easy. But Maya had learned to make every minute count. Now boarding first-class passengers for Flight 2187 to Chicago, the gate agent announced. Maya packed up her things and joined the boarding line, ticket in hand. She'd splurged on first class, something she rarely did. But the extra legroom would give her space to review her presentation one last time. The flight attendant at the door greeted passengers with practiced smiles. "Welcome aboard," she said to the older white couple ahead of Maya. When Maya stepped forward, the attendant's smile faltered slightly. "Your boarding pass, please." Maya handed it over. The attendant studied it longer than she had for previous passengers. "Ah, I see. You're in seat 3A. Maya nodded and continued down the aisle. First class was half empty, the seats wide and comfortable. She found 3A by the window, stored her carry-on in the overhead bin, and settled in. A flight attendant, different from the one at the door, approached her almost immediately. "Excuse me," she said. Her name tag read, "Patricia. Are you sure you're in the right section?" Maya looked up, momentarily confused. "Yes, seat 3A. She handed over her boarding pass again. Patricia glanced at it. "There seems to be some misunderstanding. We're expecting some true guests for these seats. Perhaps you were accidentally upgraded in the system." Maya blinked, the words, "true guests," echoing in her mind. "I'm sorry, but what exactly are true guests? I booked first class. My ticket confirms seat 3A. The attendant lowered her voice. "We need to make room for some VIP passengers. There's a nice seat available in economy. I'm sure you'll be more comfortable there." A heaviness settled in Maya's chest, a familiar weight she'd carried many times before. She looked around. 3 other first-class passengers were watching the exchange. One woman quickly averted her eyes when Maya looked her way. A businessman across the aisle frowned at his phone, pretending not to listen. "I paid for this seat," Maya said calmly, though her heart was pounding. "I'd like to see the passenger manifest, please." Patricia's smile tightened. "Ma'am, we're trying to board quickly. If you could just gather your things." "I understand the need for efficiency," Maya said, keeping her voice steady. "But I need to understand why I'm being asked to move when I have a confirmed reservation." A line was forming in the aisle behind them. Another flight attendant appeared, a young man with a concerned expression. "Is there a problem?" he asked. "This passenger is in seat 3A, but we need to make adjustments for our priority guests," Patricia explained, as if Maya wasn't sitting right there. The male attendant checked his tablet. "I don't see any note about seat reassignments." He looked at Maya apologetically. "May I see your boarding pass, ma'am?" Maya handed it over for the 3rd time. "Everything appears to be in order," he said after checking. "This is your assigned seat." Patricia pursed her lips. "Brian, we discussed this earlier. The Hendersons always fly in the front row. They're platinum members." "The Hendersons are in 1A and 1B, Brian said quietly. "Those seats are available. There's no need to move anyone." Maya sat silently, her posture straight, her expression neutral, a skill she'd perfected in hospital board meetings where she was often the only black woman present. Inside, though, she felt a familiar churning. The indignity wasn't new, but It never hurt less. An older white man in an expensive suit had been watching the scene unfold from his seat across the aisle. He cleared his throat loudly. "Some people just don't understand the system," he said to no one in particular, his voice carrying just enough for Maya to hear. "First class has standards." Maya turned to look at him directly, meeting his gaze. The man didn't flinch or look away. Instead, he raised an eyebrow, challenging her. On his briefcase was a logo, Northwell Pharmaceuticals, that Maya recognized immediately. Brian, the male flight attendant, turned back to Maya. "Ma'am, you're absolutely fine in your assigned seat. I apologize for the confusion." He gave Patricia a pointed look. "We need to continue boarding." Patricia hesitated, then walked away without another word to Maya. Brian leaned closer. "I'm sorry about that. Can I get you something to drink before takeoff?" "Water would be fine." "Thank you," Maya said. As Brian moved away, she took a deep breath and pulled out her phone. She opened the voice memo app and recorded the date, time, and a brief account of what had just happened, including the names of the staff involved. After 15 years in medicine, Maya had learned the importance of documentation. More passengers filed past to the economy section. A few glanced at Maya with expressions she couldn't quite read: curiosity, surprise. One young black woman caught her eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod of recognition and respect. The Hendersons, an elderly couple, eventually boarded and took their seats in the front row, completely unaware of the drama that had unfolded on their behalf. The man from Northwell Pharmaceuticals was typing furiously on his phone, occasionally glancing in Maya's direction. Brian returned with a bottle of water. "We'll be taking off shortly, Dr. Johnson." She noticed he'd checked her name. "Thank you, Brian." As the final passengers boarded, Maya felt her phone buzz with an email notification. The subject line read, "Urgent, Northwell Pharmaceutical Grant Application Review." Maya opened it to find a message from her hospital's research board secretary, Dr. Johnson. "Just a reminder that as chair of the board, your signature is needed for final approval on the Northwell grant. Their representatives will be presenting at next week's meeting. The $50 million funding package requires your sign-off before it can proceed." Maya looked up from her phone to find the Northwell executive still watching her with thinly veiled disdain. She wondered if he had any idea who she was, that the woman Patricia had tried to remove from first class would be reviewing his company's multi-million-dollar proposal in just a few days. The plane's door closed with a heavy thunk. The captain's voice came over the intercom, welcoming everyone aboard. Maya slipped her phone into airplane mode and leaned back in her seat. She had a speech to review, but first, she needed a moment to process what had happened. This wasn't the first time she'd faced such treatment, and sadly, it probably wouldn't be the last. But something felt different this time. Perhaps it was exhaustion from her long shift, or maybe it was seeing that Northwell logo just as she was being told. She didn't belong. As the plane began to taxi, Maya opened her laptop again. The presentation on pediatric brain tumor treatments could wait a few minutes. Instead, she pulled up the Northwell Pharmaceutical grant application that had been sitting in her inbox for the past week, the one she'd been too busy to thoroughly review until now. Maya began to read, paying special attention to the company's diversity initiatives and community outreach programs. By the time the plane lifted off the ground, she had already made some notes for questions she planned to ask at next week's meeting. Very specific, pointed questions. The flight to Chicago would take just under 2 hours. Maya had work to do. The flight had been in the air for 20 minutes when Patricia appeared beside Maya's seat again. This time, her smile seemed forced, her eyes darting nervously to the man from Northwell Pharmaceuticals. "Dr. Johnson," Patricia said, lowering her voice, "I want to apologize for the misunderstanding earlier." Maya looked up from her laptop. "Was it really a misunderstanding?" she asked quietly. Patricia's smile faltered. "Of course. Just a mix-up with the seating assignments." "Interesting," Maya said. "Because I've been flying with this airline for over 10 years, and this is the first time such a mix-up has happened to me in first class." A flush crept up Patricia's neck. "If there's anything I can get you—" "Actually," Maya said, "I'd like to speak with the flight supervisor." Patricia's eyes widened slightly. The supervisor is very busy with— I understand, Maya interrupted, her voice calm but firm. Please let them know I'd like to speak with them when they have a moment. The man across the aisle, the one with the Northwell Pharmaceuticals briefcase, scoffed loudly enough for Maya to hear. Some people are never satisfied, he muttered, not bothering to lower his voice. Always looking for special treatment. Maya turned to face him directly. She'd dealt with men like him throughout her career, men who assumed her accomplishments came from special treatment, rather than years of hard work and excellency. Oh, excuse me, she said. Do you have something you'd like to say to me directly? The man looked startled, as if he hadn't expected to be confronted. He was in his 50s, with silver-streaked hair and an expensive watch. The kind of man used to speaking without being challenged. I was just saying, he replied, his voice laced with condescension, that the flight attendants are busy. They don't need passengers creating unnecessary problems. Maya took out her phone and opened the camera app. Would you mind repeating that? I'd like to record your perspective. His expression darkened. You can't record me without my permission. Actually, on a commercial flight there's no expectation of privacy in the cabin, Maya said. But I understand if you'd prefer not to have your comments documented. The man glared at her, then pulled out his own phone and began typing furiously. Maya noticed his name on his luggage tag, Richard Powell. Patricia had disappeared during this exchange, but now returned with an older man in a different uniform. Dr. Johnson, I'm Carlos Martinez, the lead flight attendant. Patricia mentioned you wanted to speak with someone? Maya put down her phone. Yes, thank you for coming. I'd like to understand why I was asked to give up my seat for true guests when I have a confirmed first-class reservation. Carlos frowned. True guests? Who used that phrase? Patricia did, Maya said. She told me there was a misunderstanding and that I should move to economy to make room for true guests. Carlos's expression shifted from confusion to concern. Dr. Johnson, I apologize sincerely. That is absolutely not our policy or terminology. May I see your boarding pass? Maya handed it over, watching as Carlos examined it. Everything is in order, he confirmed. You're in your assigned seat. There's no reason you should have been asked to move. He glanced at Patricia, who was hovering nearby. I'll be addressing this with my team immediately. I appreciate that, Maya said. But I'd also like to file a formal complaint when we land. This isn't the first time I've experienced this type of treatment while traveling. Carlos nodded. I'll make sure you have the necessary forms and contact information. Again, I'm truly sorry this happened. As Carlos walked away, Maya could see him speaking sternly to Patricia near the galley. The Northwell executive, Richard Powell, was pretending to read something on his tablet, but Maya could tell he was listening to every word. Maya pulled out her phone again and opened her notes app. She wrote down everything that had happened, so far, including the names of everyone involved. As a black woman in a predominantly white field, Maya had learned to document everything. Too many times she'd been told her experiences weren't real or were misunderstandings. As she was typing, a notification popped up on her screen. An email from her assistant at the hospital. Dr. Johnson, just a reminder that the Northwell pharmaceutical representatives will be presenting their research funding proposal to your board next Thursday. They're expecting final approval on their $50 million grant. The CEO mentioned he's sending his top VP to personally ensure everything goes smoothly. Maya looked up at Richard Powell, who was now on his phone, speaking quietly but intensely. She couldn't hear everything but caught fragments. Johnson board. Thursday presentation. Crucial funding. A chill ran down Maya's spine as realization dawned. This man, the one who had just treated her with such disdain, was likely the VP coming to present to her board, and he had no idea who she was. The irony was almost laughable. Here was a man who thought she didn't belong in first class, and in a few days, he'd be asking her to approve $50 million in research funding. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, collecting her thoughts. When she opened them, she saw a young flight attendant, not Patricia or Carlos, approaching with a drink cart. Would you care for a beverage, ma'am? He asked. Sparkling water, please, Maya said. As he poured her drink, the attendant, his name tag read David, leaned slightly closer. Dr. Johnson, he whispered, I want you to know that several of us saw what happened during boarding. It wasn't right, and we've already discussed it in the galley. Carlos is furious. Maya looked up at him, surprised by his candor. Thank you for telling me. David nodded and continued down the aisle. When he reached Richard Powell, the executive, barely looked up as he demanded a scotch, neat. Maya sipped her water and returned to her laptop. She had a keynote address to practice, but first, she opened a new browser tab and typed, Northwell Pharmaceuticals Richard Powell, VP. The search results confirmed her suspicions. Richard Powell was Executive Vice President of Research and Development at Northwell. His company's new drug, a treatment for post-stroke brain damage, needed FDA approval, and the clinical trials required Maya's hospital's participation and funding approval to proceed. Funding that Maya, as board chair, had final say over. Maya clicked through to Northwell's website, navigating to their leadership page. The executive team photo showed 15 people, 14 white men and 1 white woman. She then checked their diversity and inclusion section, which was surprisingly thin, with vague statements about valuing differences, but no concrete policies or initiatives. A message from the flight deck announced they were beginning their descent into Chicago. Maya saved her research and closed her laptop, her mind racing with thoughts about what had just transpired and what might happen next. As the plane began its descent, Richard Powell finally seemed to notice the name on Maya's luggage tag. His expression changed, a flash of uncertainty crossing his face. He pulled out his phone, ignoring the flight attendant's reminder about electronic devices, and appeared to be searching for something. Maya pretended not to notice, but she could practically see the wheels turning in his head. Was he finally putting it together? Dr. Maya Johnson, head of neurosurgery, chair of the research funding board. The plane landed with a slight bump, taxiing toward the gate. As passengers prepared to disembark, Carlos approached Maya's seat. Dr. Johnson, I've arranged for our customer service representative to meet you at the gate. They'll take your formal complaint and ensure this incident is properly addressed. Thank you, Carlos, Maya said. I appreciate your handling of the situation. Richard Powell was now gathering his things with unusual haste, his earlier arrogance replaced by what looked like nervous energy. Maya took her time collecting her belongings, watching as Powell practically pushed past other passengers to be among the first off the plane. As Maya finally stepped into the jetway, she saw Powell waiting just beyond the gate, talking rapidly, on his phone while glancing repeatedly in her direction. When he saw her emerge, he abruptly ended his call. Dr. Johnson, he said, stepping toward her with an extended hand and a completely transformed demeanor. Richard Powell, Executive VP at Northwell Pharmaceuticals. I believe we have a meeting next week about our research proposal. Maya looked at his outstretched hand, then back at his face. The same man who, less than 2 hours ago, had implied she didn't belong in first class was now smiling at her like they were old friends. Yes, Mr. Powell, she said coolly, briefly shaking his hand. I'm familiar with your proposal, the $50 million grant for your clinical trials. Powell's smile faltered slightly at her tone. I've been looking forward to discussing it with you. Our research could revolutionize post-stroke treatment. I'm sure you believe that, Maya said. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a customer service representative to meet regarding an incident on our flight. Powell's face paled. About that, I think there may have been some misunderstanding. I wasn't fully aware of the situation. Weren't you? Maya asked. You seemed quite comfortable commenting on it at the time. Before Powell could respond, a woman in an airline uniform approached. Dr. Johnson, I'm Teresa Williams, Customer Relations Manager. Carlos radioed ahead about what happened on your flight. If you have a moment, I'd like to take your statement. Of course, Maya said, then turned back to Powell. I'll see you at Thursday's board meeting, Mr. Powell. I suggest you come prepared to answer some additional questions that weren't in our original agenda. As Maya walked away with Teresa, she could feel Powell's eyes on her back. She didn't look back. She had a keynote address to deliver tomorrow, a formal complaint to file today, and next week a very interesting board meeting to prepare for. The power dynamic had shifted, and Richard Powell knew it. But Maya wasn't interested in petty revenge. What she wanted was accountability, not just from Patricia or the airline, but from corporations like Northwell that talked about diversity in glossy brochures while their executives revealed their true attitudes when they thought no one important was watching. Maya took a deep breath as she followed Teresa to the customer service office. She'd been fighting these battles her entire career, proving she belonged in spaces where people like Richard Powell never questioned their own right to be. It was exhausting, but necessary, and sometimes, like today, the universe offered a rare opportunity for meaningful accountability. Maya intended to use it wisely. Maya sat in her hotel room, the city lights of Chicago twinkling outside her window. She'd spent an hour with Teresa Williams from the airline, documenting every detail of the incident on the plane. Teresa had been professional and sympathetic, promising that the airline would take appropriate action. "This isn't who we strive to be as a company," Teresa had said, her eyes sincere. "We'll be reviewing our training procedures and having conversations with the staff involved." Maya appreciated the response, but she'd heard similar promises before. Real change required more than just conversations and revised training manuals. It required consequences. Now, alone in her room, Maya opened her laptop and pulled up the Northwell Pharmaceuticals research grant application again. The proposal itself was impressive. A new drug therapy that could potentially help stroke patients recover more brain function during the critical first 72 hours after an event. The science was sound, the preliminary results promising. But now Maya found herself looking beyond the science, digging deeper into the company itself. Who were the people behind Northwell? What were their values? How did they treat others when they thought no one important was watching? Maya opened a new browser tab and searched for news about Northwell. Most results were standard business stories, quarterly earnings, stock prices, announcements about new drug trials. But on the third page of results, she found something interesting. A small local news story about a discrimination lawsuit filed against Northwell by former employees. According to the article, 3 black research scientists had sued the company, alleging they'd been passed over for promotions despite having superior qualifications and performance reviews. The case had been settled out of court with a non-disclosure agreement. Maya dug deeper, finding more troubling patterns. Northwell's corporate board was entirely white and male. Their executive leadership team had only one woman, and no people of color. Their published diversity statistics showed that while they hired minority employees at entry-level positions, very few advanced to management. This wasn't just about Richard Powell being rude on a plane. It was about a company culture that seemed to have a problem with diversity at every level. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Kids are fine. Tyler wants to know if you can FaceTime before bedtime." Maya glanced at the clock. It was 8:30 p.m. She'd been researching Northwell for nearly 2 hours. She texted back, "Starting FaceTime now. Thanks, Mom." Moments later, her son's smiling face appeared on the screen. Behind him, Maya could see her mother cooking dinner and her daughter working on homework at the kitchen table. "Mom, how was your flight?" Tyler asked. Maya hesitated. She never burdened her children with the weight of the racism and sexism she encountered. They were still too young to understand the complexities of these issues. "The flight was fine, sweetheart. How was school today?" "Good. I got an A on my science project. Ms. Wilson said my solar system model was the best in class." "That's wonderful," Maya said, her heart warming at her son's excitement. "I can't wait to see it when I get home." "When are you coming back?" he asked, his voice suddenly smaller. "I'll be home the day after tomorrow. I give my big speech tomorrow, remember? The one about helping kids with brain problems?" "That's right," Maya said, smiling at his simple but accurate description. "I'm going to talk to other doctors about new ways to help children." "Like you helped Tommy Rodriguez?" Tyler asked. Tommy had been Maya's patient last year, a 10-year-old, with a brain tumor that other surgeons had deemed inoperable. Maya had spent weeks studying his case, eventually developing a new surgical approach that successfully removed the tumor. Tommy was now back in school and doing well. "Yes, exactly," Like Tommy, Maya said. That's why this speech is so important. Her daughter Zoe appeared behind Tyler. Hi, Mom, are you ready for your speech? Almost, Maya said. I'm still working on a few slides. You're going to be amazing, Zoe said with the absolute confidence of a 13-year-old who thought her mother hung the moon. Just like you always are. Maya felt a lump form in her throat. Her children's unwavering belief in her was both her greatest joy and her heaviest responsibility. They saw a world of possibilities, not limitations. They didn't yet understand that some people would always see their skin color before they saw their capabilities. After chatting for 15 more minutes about school, friends, and the upcoming weekend plans, Maya said goodnight to her children and ended the call. She sat in silence for a moment, thinking about the contrast between her children's view of her and how Patricia and Richard Powell had seen her on the plane. Her phone buzzed again, this time with an email notification. It was from Dr. William Chen, her colleague on the research funding board. Maya, just got a call from Richard Powell at Northwell. He was asking all kinds of questions about you, how long you've been chair, your voting record on previous grants, etc. Seemed unusually interested. Did something happen? Call me if you need to discuss. Maya wasn't surprised. Powell had clearly realized who she was and was now scrambling to assess the damage. She replied briefly to William, promising to fill him in later, then returned to her research. An hour later, she'd compiled a thorough dossier on Northwell Pharmaceuticals. Beyond the discrimination lawsuit, she'd found several other concerning issues. Their clinical trials had consistently underrepresented minority participants, despite the fact that stroke rates were higher in Black and Hispanic communities. They'd fought against legislation requiring pharmaceutical companies to publish demographic data about their clinical trial participants. Their charitable foundation had donated to several politicians who opposed healthcare reform measures that would help underserved communities. None of these facts alone would be enough to reject their grant application. The scientific merit of their research was undeniable. But taken together, they painted a picture of a company that talked about helping all patients while systematically excluding certain communities from both their research and their corporate structure. Maya rubbed her tired eyes. It was past midnight now, and she had a keynote address to deliver tomorrow. She needed sleep. But before closing her laptop, she wrote a quick email to her assistant. Please add the following questions to next week's board meeting agenda for the Northwell presentation. What percentage of their clinical trial participants are Black, Hispanic, or from other minority groups? 2. What steps are they taking to ensure their stroke treatment will be accessible to patients in underserved communities? What specific diversity initiatives do they have in place at the executive level? How do they measure the success of their inclusion efforts? Also, please invite our hospital's diversity officer to attend the meeting. Maya sent the email, closed her laptop, and began preparing for bed. As she brushed her teeth, her mind drifted back to the incident on the plane. Patricia's words echoed in her head. We're expecting true guests for these seats. True guests. As if Maya's first-class ticket somehow counted less than others. As if she were an interloper in a space where she didn't belong. It was a feeling she knew well, from medical school where professors had mistaken her for janitorial staff, from hospital board meetings, where her ideas were ignored until repeated by white male colleagues, from conferences, where attendees assumed she was support staff rather than a keynote speaker, and now, tomorrow, she would stand before thousands of her peers to deliver a speech about her groundbreaking research. Some of those peers had likely had similar experiences. Others had probably never thought twice about their right to occupy any space they chose. Maya finished her bedtime routine and climbed into bed, setting her alarm for 6 a.m. As she drifted towards sleep, she found herself thinking not about her speech, or even about Northwell Pharmaceuticals, but about her children. What kind of world would Tyler and Zoe inherit? Would they still have to fight for spaces that should rightfully be theirs? Would they still encounter people who saw their skin color as a reason to question their presence? Maya's last thought before sleep claimed her was a promise, not just to herself but to Tyler and Zoe and all the children who deserved better. She would use whatever power and influence she had to create change. Starting with making sure companies like Northwell understood that diversity wasn't just a checkbox on a form, but a fundamental value that affected real people's lives. Morning came too quickly. Maya's alarm jarred her awake at 6 a.m. and she spent the next hour reviewing her presentation one final time. Her keynote address wasn't until 10 a.m., but she wanted to arrive early to check the audiovisual setup and greet colleagues. As she dressed in her favorite navy blue suit, the one she saved for important presentations, Maya's phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender was Richard Powell. For a moment, Maya considered ignoring it. She needed to focus on her speech, not on dealing with Powell's damage control attempts. But curiosity got the better of her, and she opened the email. Dr. Johnson, I want to sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding on yesterday's flight. I was unaware of your position and importance in the medical community. I look forward to discussing our research proposal with you next week and addressing any concerns you might have. Regards, Richard Powell, Executive VP, Research and Development, Northwell Pharmaceuticals. Maya read the email twice, noting what Powell didn't apologize for, his actual behavior and comments. He was sorry for not recognizing her position and importance, not for suggesting she didn't belong in first class. He was sorry because she turned out to be someone with power over something he wanted, not because his actions were wrong. She closed the email without responding and finished editing ready. She would deal with Richard Powell next week. Today was about sharing her research with colleagues who could use it to help children with brain tumors, children like Tommy Rodriguez, who were alive today because Maya refused to accept limitations others tried to place on her. As Maya gathered her things and headed for the door, she felt a familiar sense of purpose wash over her. The incident on the plane, Richard Powell, Northwell Pharmaceuticals, all of it would be addressed in due time. But not at the expense of the work that truly mattered. She had fought too hard and come too far to let anyone or anything derail her from her mission. Not Patricia with her true guests comment, not Richard Powell with his condescension, not a system that still sometimes treated her as less than. Maya Johnson, MD, PhD, had earned her place, in first class, in the operating room, at the keynote podium, and at the head of the research funding board. And she intended to use every one of those positions to make sure others could earn their places too. As she stepped into the bright Chicago morning, Maya took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. Today, she would share her groundbreaking research with the world. Next week, she would have a very interesting conversation with Richard Powell and Northwell Pharmaceuticals. And both of those things would bring her one step closer to the world she wanted her children to inherit. Maya's keynote speech had been a resounding success. For 45 minutes, she'd held the audience of medical professionals spellbound as she explained her innovative approach to treating pediatric brain tumors. The standing ovation at the end had lasted nearly 2 minutes. Now, 3 days later, Maya sat in her office at Memorial Hospital, reviewing her notes for the upcoming board meeting where Northwell Pharmaceuticals would present their research proposal. The $50 million grant would fund clinical trials for their new stroke treatment drug, a potentially life-saving advancement in medicine. Under normal circumstances, Maya would have been enthusiastic about such promising research. But the incident on the plane had cast a shadow over Northwell's proposal, raising questions about the company's values and culture. A knock on her office door interrupted her thoughts. It was Dr. William Chen, her colleague from the research board. "Got a minute?" he asked, poking his head in. "Sure. Come in," Maya said, setting aside her notes. William took a seat across from her desk. "So, are you going to tell me what happened with Richard Powell? He called me twice more after I emailed you." Maya sighed and recounted the incident. On the plane, the flight attendant asking her to move for true guests, Powell's comments, and their awkward encounter at the gate when he finally realized who she was. William's expression darkened as she spoke. "That's completely unacceptable," he said when she finished. "And now he wants us to give his company $50 million. The research itself is solid," Maya reminded him. "The drug could help thousands of stroke patients if it works as they predict. But The company culture sounds toxic, William pointed out. How can we trust them to conduct inclusive clinical trials? How can we be sure the treatment will be accessible to all patients, not just the ones they consider true patients? Maya nodded. These were exactly the questions she'd been wrestling with. That's why I added those items to the agenda. I want to hear directly from Powell about their diversity initiatives and clinical trial demographics. William leaned forward. The board will follow your lead on this, Maya. You know that, right? As chair, your recommendation carries significant weight. I know, Maya said quietly. That's why I need to be careful. This can't be about me getting back at Powell for how he treated me. It has to be about ensuring Northwell is the right partner for our hospital. Of course, William agreed. But his behavior is relevant. It speaks to the company's culture, which directly impacts how they'll conduct the research we'd be funding. Maya's assistant appeared in the doorway. Dr. Johnson, the Northwell team has arrived for their pre-meeting. They're in the small conference room. Maya checked her watch. The meeting wasn't scheduled for another hour. They're early. Mr. Powell insisted on speaking with you before the board meeting, her assistant explained. He said it was important. Maya and William exchanged looks. I guess I should hear what he has to say, Maya said, standing up. Would you mind joining us, William? I'd prefer to have a witness. Of course, William said, rising to his feet. Together, they walked to the small conference room where Richard Powell waited. He wasn't alone. A younger man and woman in equally expensive suits sat on either side of him, briefcases open on the table. Powell stood immediately when Maya entered. His demeanor was completely different from their encounter on the plane. Deferential, almost nervous. Dr. Johnson, thank you for seeing us before the meeting, he said, extending his hand. These are my colleagues, Dr. Lisa Thompson and Dr. James Harris from our research team. Maya shook hands with all three, introducing William as she did so. You wanted to speak with me? Yes, Powell said, gesturing for everyone to sit. I wanted to address what happened on the flight to Chicago. Maya nodded but said nothing, waiting for him to continue. Powell cleared his throat. First, I want to offer my sincere apologies for my behavior. It was inappropriate and disrespectful. There's no excuse for how I acted. Maya noticed that this apology was different from his email. He was acknowledging his actual behavior now, not just his failure to recognize her status. I appreciate that, she said carefully. But I'm curious why you felt comfortable making those comments in the first place. Powell shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I don't have a good answer for that. It was wrong. Yes, it was, Maya agreed. And it makes me wonder about the culture at Northwell Pharmaceuticals. If that's how an executive VP behaves in public, what values are being modeled throughout the company? Lisa Thompson, the female researcher, leaned forward. Dr. Johnson, if I may? I've been with Northwell for 8 years. What Mr. Powell did was wrong, and it doesn't reflect our company values. We've been working hard to improve our diversity and inclusion efforts. I'd like to hear more about those efforts, Maya said. Specifically, I'm interested in your clinical trial demographics. What percentage of your participants are from minority communities? The three Northwell representatives exchanged glances. It was Harris who answered. Currently, about 12% of our trial participants are from minority groups. And what percentage of stroke victims in the United States are from those same minority groups? Maya asked, though she already knew the answer. Harris hesitated. Approximately 30%. So your trial participants don't reflect the actual population affected by stroke, Maya pointed out. Why is that? Recruitment challenges, Powell said quickly. It's difficult to get participants from certain communities. Have you considered that might be because those communities don't trust pharmaceutical companies? Maya asked. And that perhaps that distrust is warranted when executives from those companies make comments suggesting certain people don't belong in certain spaces? Powell had the grace to look ashamed. Dr. Johnson, I understand your concerns. That's why we wanted to meet with you before the board presentation. We've prepared a new diversity initiative that we'd like to present today. He nodded to Thompson, who pulled a folder from her briefcase and slid it across the table. Maya opened it to find a detailed plan for increasing minority participation in Northwell's clinical trials, along with a proposed partnership with community health centers in predominantly Black and Hispanic neighborhoods. "This is impressive," Maya admitted, scanning the document. "But it looks very new. When was this created?" "We've been working on it for several months," Powell claimed. William, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "The document properties show it was created 3 days ago, right after your flight with Dr. Johnson." Powell flushed. "The formal document is new, but the ideas have been in development for some time." Maya closed the folder. "Mr. Powell, I appreciate that you're trying to address my concerns, but I need to be honest with you. I'm troubled by what appears to be a reactive approach to diversity rather than a proactive one." "What can we do to demonstrate our commitment?" Powell asked, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. Maya considered the question. This wasn't about humiliating Powell or punishing Northwell. It was about ensuring their research would benefit all patients, not just the ones the company deemed true patients. "In your presentation to the board today, I want you to be completely transparent," Maya said. "Acknowledge the current gaps in your clinical trial demographics. Share this new initiative, but be honest about when and why it was developed. And most importantly, I want to hear how you plan to measure its success, not just in percentages of participants, but in real outcomes for patients from all communities." Powell nodded, looking both relieved and apprehensive. "We can do that. And one more thing," Maya added. "I'd like Northwell to establish a community advisory board for this research. People from the communities most affected by stroke who can provide input on everything from trial recruitment to treatment accessibility." "That's not standard procedure," Powell said hesitantly. "Neither is asking passengers to give up their first-class seats for true guests," Maya replied evenly. "Sometimes we need to change our standard procedures to get better results." Thompson leaned forward. "I think it's an excellent idea, actually. We could learn a lot from such an advisory board." Powell looked at his colleague in surprise, then back at Maya. "We'll include it in our presentation." "Good," Maya said, standing up. "The board meeting starts in 45 minutes. I look forward to hearing your full proposal then." As the Northwell team gathered their materials, Maya and William stepped outside the conference room. "That was masterful," William murmured once. They were out of earshot. "You didn't reject their proposal outright, but you're holding them accountable." "Their research really could help people," Maya said. "I don't want to block that. But I also want to make sure it helps everyone, not just the patients Northwell traditionally serves." "Do you think they'll follow through?" William asked. Maya considered the question. Powell might not if it were just up to him. But did you notice how that woman Thompson responded to the community advisory board idea? "I think there are people at Northwell who genuinely want to do better. They just need the leverage to make changes. And you just gave them that leverage," William observed. Maya nodded. "Sometimes the most effective way to change a system is from within. If we approve this grant with these new conditions, we're not just funding stroke research. We're funding a shift in how Northwell approaches diversity and inclusion." "And if they don't follow through?" William asked. "Then we'll have documentation of their commitments and we can hold them accountable," Maya said. "This won't be the last time they need our hospital's participation in their research." As they walked back toward Maya's office, her phone buzzed with a text message from the airline's customer relations department. "Dr. Johnson, following our investigation of the incident on Flight 2187, we have taken appropriate disciplinary action. Patricia Wilson has been suspended pending completion of our diversity training program, and we've implemented new protocols to prevent similar incidents. We value your business and hope you'll continue to fly with us." Maya showed the message to William. "See, accountability works." "Speaking of which," William said, checking his watch, "we should head to the boardroom. The other members will be arriving soon." Maya nodded, gathering her notes from her office before walking with William to the main conference room. As they entered, she saw several board members already seated around the large table, chatting amongst themselves. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the hospital's diversity officer whom Maya had invited to the meeting, approached them immediately. Maya, I reviewed the questions you added to the agenda, Elena said. They're excellent. I've brought some additional data on stroke rates in minority communities that might be helpful during the discussion. Perfect, Maya said, taking the folder Elena offered. I want this conversation to be about facts and outcomes, not emotions. As more board members arrived, Maya took her seat at the head of the table. From this position, she could see everyone in the room, the 12 board members representing various hospital departments, Elena sitting to one side with her materials ready, and the empty chairs where the Northwell team would soon sit. Maya had spent her entire career fighting for her place at tables like this one. Now, as chair of the Research Funding Board, she had the power to ensure others would have places too. Not just other doctors and researchers who looked like her, but patients who had been historically underserved by the medical establishment. The door opened, and the Northwell team entered. Powell looked nervous but determined as he set up his presentation materials. Thompson caught Maya's eye and gave her a slight nod, an acknowledgement of their earlier conversation, and perhaps a silent thank you for the opportunity to present a more inclusive vision for their research. Maya called the meeting to order. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we'll be reviewing Northwell Pharmaceuticals' proposal for a $50 million research grant to fund clinical trials for their new stroke treatment drug. She turned to Powell. Mr. Powell, you and your team have the floor. As Powell began his presentation, Maya noticed a change in his demeanor. Gone was the condescending man from the plane who thought certain people didn't belong in certain spaces. In his place was someone who seemed genuinely committed to presenting a more inclusive research plan. Whether out of sincere belief or necessity, Maya couldn't be sure, but perhaps the reason didn't matter as much as the result. What mattered was that stroke patients from all communities would have access to this potentially life-saving treatment. What mattered was that Northwell would be held accountable for its commitments to diversity and inclusion. And what mattered most of all was that Maya had used her position and power not for personal revenge, but to create meaningful change, the kind of change that might help ensure her children would encounter fewer Patricia Wilsons and Richard Powells in their futures. As Powell concluded his opening remarks and began detailing the research methodology, Maya allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. This was how progress happened, not all at once in grand gestures, but in small, strategic moments when people with power chose to use it wisely. 3 weeks had passed since the Northwell Pharmaceuticals presentation. Maya sat in her office reviewing the final paperwork for the grant approval. The board had voted unanimously to fund the research, but with significant conditions attached. Conditions that Maya had proposed and the board had enthusiastically supported. First, Northwell would be required to ensure that at least 30% of their clinical trial participants came from minority communities, reflecting the actual demographics of stroke patients in the United States. Second, they would establish and fund a community advisory board comprised of representatives from those same communities. And third, Northwell would submit quarterly diversity and inclusion reports detailing their progress in both their clinical trials and their corporate hiring and promotion practices. Richard Powell had accepted these conditions without argument, seeming almost relieved that the grant hadn't been rejected outright. His colleague, Dr. Lisa Thompson, had been even more supportive, volunteering to personally oversee the implementation of the new initiatives. A knock on her office door interrupted Maya's thoughts. It was Elena Rodriguez, the hospital's diversity officer. Got a minute? Elena asked. Of course, Maya said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. What's up? Elena sat down and placed a folder on Maya's desk. I just got off the phone with Lisa Thompson at Northwell. They're moving quickly on establishing the Community Advisory Board. These are the candidates they're considering. Maya opened the folder and scanned the list of names: community health workers, stroke survivors, and advocates from predominantly Black, Hispanic, and Asian neighborhoods. It was an impressive and diverse group. This looks promising, Maya said. Thompson seems genuinely committed to making this work. She is, Elena agreed. She told me something interesting too. Apparently there's been a major shakeup at Northwell since your board meeting. Several executives have been reassigned, including Richard Powell. He's no longer heading the stroke research division. Maya raised an eyebrow. Really? Who's in charge now? Thompson, Elena said with a smile. She's been promoted to executive director of clinical research, and her first official act was to create a new diversity and inclusion committee with actual decision-making power. Maya leaned back in her chair, processing this information. So our conditions for the grant sparked internal changes at Northwell. It seems that way, Elena said. Thompson mentioned that several employees have come forward since Powell's reassignment, sharing stories about the company culture and offering ideas for improvement. She said your stand inspired people. Maya hadn't expected this outcome. She'd hoped to ensure the stroke research included all communities, but she hadn't anticipated catalyzing broader changes within Northwell itself. There's something else, Elena continued, pulling another document from her bag. I've been thinking about what happened with you on that flight and similar experiences I've had. We're not the only ones. She handed Maya a proposal titled Healthcare Equity Initiative. I think we need a more systematic approach to addressing these issues, not just at Northwell but across all our research partnerships and in our own hospital. Maya skimmed the document, impressed by Elena's thoroughness. The initiative would establish new criteria for evaluating research proposals, require diversity training for all hospital staff, and create a patient advocacy committee to address disparities in care. This is excellent, Elena, Maya said. Have you shared it with the hospital board yet? No, Elena admitted. I wanted your input first, and honestly, I thought it might carry more weight coming from both of us. Maya nodded, understanding the strategy. As chair of the research funding board and one of the hospital's top surgeons, her endorsement would give the initiative significant credibility. I'd be honored to co-sponsor this with you, Maya said. Let's schedule a meeting with the board next week. As Elena left, Maya's phone rang. It was her assistant. Dr. Johnson, the CEO of Skyline Airlines, is on line 1. He says it's regarding your complaint from last month. Maya picked up the phone. This is Dr. Johnson. Dr. Johnson, this is Robert Davidson, CEO of Skyline Airlines. I wanted to speak with you personally about the incident on Flight 2187. First, let me apologize for the completely unacceptable treatment you received. Thank you, Maya said, surprised by the call. She'd filed her complaint expecting a form letter response, not a call from the CEO. After reviewing the incident, we've made several changes to our training and procedures, Davidson continued. Patricia Wilson has been terminated, and we've implemented a new anti-bias training program for all customer-facing staff. Maya hadn't expected that outcome either. She'd wanted accountability, but not necessarily for someone to lose their job. Mr. Davidson, while I appreciate the seriousness with which you're taking this, I wonder if termination was necessary. Perhaps Ms. Wilson could have benefited from training and a second chance. There was a pause on the line. That's remarkably gracious of you, Dr. Johnson. To be honest, this wasn't Ms. Wilson's first incident of this nature. We'd had previous complaints, but they weren't properly addressed by her supervisors. That's part of the systemic issue we're now correcting. I see, Maya said. That put things in a different light. We'd like to do more than just apologize, Davidson added. We're establishing a scholarship program for minority students interested in aviation careers, and we'd like to name it after you if you're willing. Maya hadn't expected that either. That's very generous, but perhaps the scholarship should honor someone who's actually contributed to aviation. We've thought about that, Davidson said. But your response to this incident, firm but fair, focused on systemic change rather than personal retaliation, has been a model we'd like to emulate in our corporate culture. The scholarship would be less about aviation specifically, and more about creating pathways for underrepresented groups in all professional fields. Maya considered the offer. I'd need to think about it, and I'd want input on how the scholarship is structured and awarded. Of course, Davidson agreed. We can work together on the details. After ending the call, Maya sat in silence for a moment, reflecting on how a single incident had created such far-reaching ripples. What had started as yet another demeaning experience, the kind she'd endured countless times throughout her career, had somehow catalyzed meaningful changes at both Northwell and Skyline. Her phone buzzed with a text from her daughter. "Mom, don't forget my dance recital tonight, 7 p.m. sharp." Maya smiled, texting back, "Wouldn't miss it for the world. Already have my ticket in hand." She gathered her things and prepared to head home. She'd finish reviewing the grant paperwork tomorrow. Tonight was about Zoe and her dance recital, the ordinary, precious moments of family life that grounded Maya amid the professional battles. As she drove home, Maya thought about what she would tell her children about the incident on the plane. She'd been protecting them from these realities, wanting to preserve their innocence and optimism. But Tyler was 11 now, and Zoe 13, old enough to start understanding the world as it was, not just as Maya wished it to be. They needed to know that they would face challenges because of their skin color, but they also needed to know that those challenges didn't define them or limit what they could achieve. Most importantly, they needed to understand that having power came with responsibility, the responsibility to create change not just for themselves, but for others. Maya pulled into her driveway, her decision made. She would tell them about the plane incident, but not as a story of victimhood. She would tell it as a story of accountability and systemic change, how one person standing firm could create ripples that affected many others. Inside the house, she found her mother in the kitchen preparing dinner while Tyler worked on homework at the table. "Mom!" Tyler exclaimed, jumping up to hug her. "Did you see the email from my science teacher? I got chosen for the regional science fair." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Maya said, hugging him back. "I'm so proud of you." Her mother smiled from the stove. "He's been talking about nothing else all afternoon." "Oh, and Zoe's upstairs getting ready for her recital. She's nervous." Maya nodded and headed upstairs, knocking softly on her daughter's bedroom door before entering. Zoe was sitting at her vanity, attempting to put her hair in a bun for her dance performance. "Need some help?" Maya asked. Zoe nodded, relief washing over her face. "Yes, please. I can't get it right." Maya took the brush and began gently working with her daughter's hair. "You know," she said conversationally, "something interesting happened on my flight to Chicago a few weeks ago." "What?" Zoe asked, meeting Maya's eyes in the mirror. Slowly, Maya told her daughter about the incident. The flight attendant asking her to move for true guests, the man who thought she didn't belong in first class, and how that man turned out to be from a company seeking her approval for a major grant. "What did you do?" Zoe asked, her eyes wide. "I didn't get angry or make a scene," Maya explained, continuing to work on Zoe's hair. "But I didn't back down either. I stayed in my seat because that's where I belonged. And later, when I had the power to decide about that company's grant, I didn't reject it out of anger. Instead, I used it as an opportunity to create better conditions for people who are often left out." "Did that man get in trouble?" Zoe asked. "He lost his position leading the research team," Maya said. "But more importantly, the company is making changes that will help more people get access to their medicine. Sometimes the goal isn't to punish one person, but to fix the system that allowed their behavior in the first place." Zoe was quiet for a moment, processing. "Is that going to happen to me too? People thinking I don't belong places?" Maya's heart ached at the question, but she couldn't lie. Sometimes, yes, there will be people who judge you based on your skin color rather than your abilities or your character. It's not fair, and it's not right, but it's a reality we have to deal with. "How do you not get angry?" Zoe asked. "Oh, I do get angry," Maya admitted, securing the final pin in Zoe's now perfect bun. "But I try not to let that anger control my actions. I use it as fuel to work harder, to prove those people wrong, and most importantly, to create change so that you and Tyler might face these situations less often than I have." She turned Zoe's chair so they were facing each other. "But I want you to remember something very important. Those people who judge you without knowing you, they're wrong. You belong anywhere your talents and hard work take you. Never doubt that." Zoe nodded, her eyes shining with a mix of concern and determination. "Like how you belong in first class." "Exactly," Maya said with a smile. "And like how you belong on that stage tonight." Later, sitting in the auditorium watching Zoe dance, Maya felt a profound sense of purpose. Everything she'd done, From standing her ground on that flight to imposing conditions on Northwell's grant, to supporting Elena's healthcare equity initiative, was about creating a world where her children could move through life, encountering fewer barriers than she had. It wouldn't happen overnight. One incident on a plane wouldn't transform society. But change happened in moments like these, when people with power chose to use it not just for themselves, but for the greater good. After the recital, as they were heading home, Maya's phone buzzed with an email. It was from Lisa Thompson at Northwell. Dr. Johnson, I wanted to update you on our progress. The Community Advisory Board has been established and held its first meeting today. The insights they provided were invaluable. Already they've suggested several modifications to our recruitment strategy that we're implementing immediately. On a personal note, I want to thank you. Your conditions for our grant didn't just change our research approach, they've changed our company. We're in the process of reviewing all our clinical trials to ensure they reflect the populations we serve, and we've instituted new hiring and promotion policies to address the lack of diversity in our leadership. None of this would have happened without your stand. You've created change that will benefit countless patients beyond just those in our stroke trials. With gratitude, Lisa Thompson, Executive Director, Clinical Research, Northwell Pharmaceuticals. Maya smiled as she put her phone away. One person couldn't change the world overnight, but they could create ripples that, over time, might become waves. In the back seat, Tyler and Zoe were debating the merits of ice cream versus frozen yogurt as a post-recital treat. Maya listened to their animated discussion, their voices full of the confidence and joy she worked so hard to protect. Mom, what do you think? Tyler asked. Ice cream or froyo? How about both? Maya suggested. I think tonight calls for a double celebration, Zoe's amazing performance and your science fair selection. The children cheered their approval. As Maya drove toward their favorite dessert shop, she thought about the concept of true guests, who belonged and who didn't. Her children belonged everywhere their dreams might take them, and Maya would continue using whatever power and influence she had to ensure those dreams wouldn't be limited by others' perceptions or prejudices. It wouldn't be easy. There would be more Patricia Wilsons and Richard Powells along the way. But there would also be allies like William Chen, Elena Rodriguez, and even Lisa Thompson, people committed to creating more inclusive spaces and systems. And most importantly, there would be Tyler and Zoe, watching and learning from how their mother navigated these challenges. They were the true reason Maya fought these battles, not just to make her own journey easier, but to smooth the path for those who would follow. As they pulled into the parking lot of the ice cream shop, Maya made a silent promise to herself and her children. She would continue to stand her ground when necessary, to speak up when others couldn't, and to use her position to create meaningful change whenever possible. Because sometimes, the most powerful response to being told you don't belong wasn't just claiming your own space, it was using that space to open doors for others.